It's a great pleasure to welcome you all to this community of practice event of today, focusing on carbon markets for smallholders. We will have different speakers who Alexis is going to introduce later on. Let me just give you a short introduction. My name is Claudia Schepp. I work for the Executive Secretariat of the 4 per mille initiative. It's a climate initiative which was founded under the Lima Paris Action Agenda around the COP in Paris 2015. And the overall aim of the initiative is to support healthy and carbon-rich soils worldwide for climate and food security. And we have a whole range of activities we're engaged in, ranging from political engagement, advocacy work at different levels. But mainly we're a very big network of over 700 members and partners by now, and they come from over 70 countries. One of our big foci hence is to foster the exchange of our members and partners on topics related to soil health and soil organic carbon at different levels, at the international level, but also at the regional level. Just this year, we had 3 regional meetings, one happening in Western Africa, one in Northern Europe, and the other one just now, we just returned from it in India, so it was focusing on Asia and Pacific.
You have been muted by mistake, Claudia.
We can't hear.
Sorry, you couldn't hear me?
Only the
No,
last 10
we
seconds.
couldn't hear you. I think for 1 minute or so. Yeah.
Okay, so okay, so I guess you still heard me saying that we're a big network with different activities. I was just mentioning the regional level networking events we just had in Western Africa, Northern Europe, and the Asia Pacific region. We have different educational formats. One being recently started is the webinar series of our Science and Technical Committee, which I will come back to later, and also invite you to the next events of that with a rather technical focus, a technical and scientific focus mainly. And then, and that's why you're all here today, we're happy to have the community of practice, which is focusing to share information on successful land management and soil organic carbon projects. To showcase good practices and common barriers, and mostly to connect practitioners. And this is a joint project which we have for over 2 years now with our partners from the GIZ. So I'm very happy that we could already invite you to a couple of webinars, a couple of discussion formats under this community of practice. And the next one is happening today on this topic where I guess you're all really interested in. Okay, maybe so far for now. Let me not steal more of your time with general introductions and instead hand over to my colleague Alexis Brakan from GIZ, who will give us a brief overview of what's happening today and the topics we are just having a look into during the next 1.5 hours all together. Thank you very much, and Alexis, the floor is yours.
Good morning, everybody. Thank you, Claudia. My name is Alexis Brakan, and I'm a climate and agricultural advisor at GIZ, working for the GIZ Soil Protection and Sustainable Land Management projects. Smallholder farmers, from our point of view, play a very vital role in managing and maintaining the world's agricultural land, and they are the most vulnerable to the effects of climate change. Agricultural carbon projects can compensate small-scale farmers for restoring carbon in soils and trees, while in the same time improving yields and incomes, as well as soil health and climate resilience. But carbon projects in agriculture come with particular challenges and risks that may lead to poor benefits for smallholders. This event we designed to bring together the experiences we made during the GIZ's first carbon project in smallholder agriculture to support high-quality carbon projects for the benefit of smallholders. First, we will learn about the G7 compensation initiative, which will support payment for ecosystem service schemes like carbon market projects in the long run. And then the know-how we gained during the development of a pilot project in Western Kenya will be presented, summarized and presented. We also have a write-up in form of a guidebook for project developers, which is accessible. I will shortly post the link into the chat. The guidebook has been launched at the African Climate Week, and we have the opportunity to discuss the findings and recommendations later. But we will also hear firsthand from the coordination entity of the pilot carbon project we set up, the Soil Carbon Certification Services, to hear about their challenges and solutions in terms of institutionalization of the carbon scheme. I'm happy to discuss with you later on. Thank you for joining, and over to Claudia again.
Thank you very much, Alexis, for this introduction. For me, just some very short housekeeping remarks. We would like to remind you once again to please keep your mics switched off. Later on during the discussion, you will have the opportunity to unmute yourself and speak openly. But for now, during the discussions, please stay on mute. You can ask questions in the chat. We will try to pick them up afterwards during the discussion time. Otherwise, all unanswered questions, and I guess there will be quite many because it's a very rich topic and we only have 1.5 hours, will be picked up later on again. So you can send them to us via email or leave them on the wiki page, just for you to know already. Let me see, did I forget something? I think that's it for now. So I'm very happy to welcome and introduce you to our first speaker, Dr. Sophia Baumert from GIZ, who is a advisor for agriculture and climate for the German Federal Ministry for Economic Cooperation and Development. And she will give us a brief introduction to the compensation initiative, as Alexis just mentioned. Just a remark beforehand, Sophia will probably have to leave earlier. So all the questions you may still have for her, please share them in the chat or via email. We will provide the email address just in a minute. Sophia, if you're with us now, the floor is yours. Looking forward to your presentation.
Yeah, thank you, Claudia. Good morning to everyone. So I see the presentation as a very small icon. I'm not sure if the others also do.
I think for me, it's okay.
Okay, so then it's probably on my side. Anyway, so I'm happy to present you the compensation initiative that has been launched under the G7, the German G7 presidency last year. And our ministry, the BMZ, has been leading the working group on food security. And this was the initiative that resulted from this working group. And in my capacity within GIZ, I was supporting this process. So Alexis, maybe next slide. Okay, so this is very small for me. I have to open it somewhere else. Sorry. Now I see it larger. Okay, so the idea behind the initiative was that smallholder farmers, apart from producing food, they also provide ecosystem services, and but they are not rewarded for it, and that should change. So it said that agriculture producers worldwide should receive adequate compensation for their multifunctional services. So basically the initiative is about promoting payments for ecosystem services. So the ecosystem services that are provided by the smallholder farmers. The objectives are to improve smallholder farmers' incomes by these payment for ecosystem services, to create incentives for sustainable farming practices, to deliver co-benefits, to diversity financial instruments for public and private funding of ecosystem services, so by creating market-based instruments, but also instruments that can be used by governments, and to attract international climate finance to adaptation and mitigation action in the agriculture sector. And the initiative is thought in two pathways. So first, facilitating exchange between stakeholders and advancing relevant recommendation for compensation mechanisms. So what is out there and what is working and who are our partners we could collaborate with. And the second is really fostering implementation partnerships and piloting and scaling up compensation mechanisms. Next slide. Alexis. Okay, so for now, it's mainly the BMZ that is driving this initiative. And last year, they have already put 15 million euros to a partnership with IFAD to pilot 3 projects in different countries. And this year, there's a new partnership coming up again with IFAD to jointly invest more than 10 million euros into a smallholder agroforestry finance. This is initiated by the Arcon and Rabobank. And the beauty of this initiative is really that the SAF, the Smallholder Agroforestry Finance, is a blended finance vehicle for the pre-financing of carbon project in smallholder agriculture. So the idea is that the BMZ is giving a layer of concessional finance that is de-risking and attracting private investments into the facility, and that the facility can then give loans to local partners that can give in-kind provision to the farmers to do the needed investments to transform to agroforestry, to transition to agroforestry. And then the loan is paid back by the generated carbon credits. So this is a really good initiative. It's going to start the next year. So we should keep an eye open for this one. Alexis, next slide. So another milestone for this year is that the BMZ has initiated a contract with CIAT for a research project that is accompanying the compensation initiative to really make sure that there is also a scientific foundation of everything what's happening, and that the initiative is also informed by the evidence that is generated. And there's another cooperation starting with the World Bank under the Food Systems 2030 Trust Fund that is heavily supported by the BMZ. And here the idea is, so the Food System Trust Fund is also working on the repurposing agriculture subsidies agenda, meaning that subsidies shouldn't be used in a harmful way, but should be used for incentivizing sustainable practices. And there we want to explore ways to use compensation, so payment for ecosystem services, as vehicle for repurposing these subsidies. And there's one interesting case going on in Malawi about payments for soil health services instead of subsidizing fertilizer. Alexis, I think that's already the last slide. Yeah, so there is a homepage. You see this QR code where you find also news published and also publications that are out under the umbrella of the compensation initiative. And if you have any questions, you can direct them to Alexis. He's also well informed about this initiative. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Sophia, for this introduction to the compensation initiative. I guess it's very vivid at the moment and there's a lot going on. So I hope we will hear a lot more about it during the months and years to come. Thank you for that. Maybe now from the global level, let's zoom in a little to the project development on the ground. And I'm very happy to welcome Adaugu as our next speaker. Adaugu is working for the unique land use division and
Sorry, Claudia.
Sorry, Alexis, yes?
Or is Aaron next?
Okay, so I don't know, I was just following the agenda. But of course, if Aaron wants to go first, no problem. We can start with Aaron. Okay, so Alexis, we start with Aaron. That's
Oh no,
the
sorry,
next.
my mistake. The other way around. Sorry.
Okay, so this was just to get everybody awake again. I think. Okay, so let me start again to avoid confusion. Our next speaker will for sure now be Ada Ogu from Unique Land Use. Ada Ogu is going to introduce us to the guidebook they developed on their experiences in carbon project design on the ground. I think she will be joined by her colleague Tim. And with no more words, Ada, I think I just give the floor to you, and you can present the guidebook and your story about that. Thank you.
Sure. Thank you, Claudia, for that introduction. Yeah, so today I would like to shed some more light on the guidebook, which has already been introduced, specifically a selection of key lessons learned so far through the GIZ ProSol program in Kenya with the pilot carbon project. Sorry, next slide, please, just to have an overview on the content. So we'll be taking a look at some selected key lessons learned from the project, as well as just a few takeaway points to discuss or think about as conclusions from this presentation. And sorry if I'm looking this way, it's because I have two screens. So yeah, just putting that out there. Next slide, please. Yeah, so just as a background to the guidebook, I won't speak too much on the Western Kenya Carbon Project itself, because I believe the next speaker would go more in depth into that. But the guidebook is basically based on lessons learned from the GIZ ProSol engagements in Kenya, but also in India and Madagascar. With the Western Kenya Soil Carbon Project now currently at validation stage, it's more or less serving as a pilot project for the other country packages. And Unique Land Use as a consulting company has been involved in the development process of this project. And yeah, this is basically, the guidebook was basically a compilation of some of the lessons learned throughout this process. Just key facts to know about the project that might be relevant to this presentation. The scale of the project so the project plans to reach a full scale of 32,000 hectares upon full scale. At the moment, it's currently at 11,000 hectares so far. Keep in mind that 32,000 hectares is more or less 40,000 farms in Western Kenya, since these are smallholder farms, usually farming less than 1.5 hectares. There are also subsistence farms, so family farms cultivating on highly degraded soils throughout the year. And the project basically promotes sustainable land management practices, for example, mulching, crop rotation, composting, farmyard manure, and a wide package of practices to support farmers. The project also offers technical support through advisory services in adopting and implementing these practices. Yeah, next slide, please. So today, the key points that we'll be focusing on are surrounding the regulatory environment, that's the wider policy landscape relating to voluntary carbon markets, as well as the agricultural services, which we find are a key component of these types of projects. And then lastly, the measurement, reporting, and verification, MRV. I think we'll be leaving out the aspect of project finance for the purpose of this presentation, but all of these topics and more are covered in the guidebook. If you're interested in learning also a bit more of what is outside the presentation for today. Next slide, please. Thank you. Yes. So now looking at the topic of regulatory environment, one large overarching theme that we recently come more across is the fact that voluntary carbon markets are becoming increasingly regulated. And apart from the national perspective of host countries, which we sort of focus on in this slide, it's worth mentioning that just in general, voluntary carbon markets, which are typically known for their flexibility compared to compliance markets, are increasingly facing regulation on all sides. So for example, even from the buyer and investor perspective, there is more focus on, for example, the types of claims that buyers of carbon credits can make. Taking one example as the latest EU regulation on claims, but also looking at initiatives popping up, such as the voluntary carbon markets integrity initiative, which is giving guidance to buyers of carbon credits on the types of claims they can make. But now looking more closely at the project developer perspective, we see that many host countries as well are starting to increase regulations related to the development of carbon projects. And this shows up in many ways, for example, with increasing taxes now on carbon revenues, fees, also restrictions in terms of the sale and ownership of carbon credits, as countries try to also account for their NDC commitments and so on. Just in summary, what this means for project developers is that there is higher uncertainty, which project developers have to reckon with while choosing host countries to develop projects in. And this often distracts investors and might reduce probably the viability of such projects, especially when you look at some of the taxes that some countries have proposed for carbon projects, for example. And so we see the increasing need for project developers to, first of all, prioritize countries that offer attractive regulatory environments, but also recognizing that this is not always possible, since a lot of these regulations are new and oftentimes pop up quite quite suddenly. So we also see the need as well for project developers to increasingly engage as well with public stakeholders and bring some of these issues to the forefront, especially considering that soil organic carbon projects are not often the focus of such regulations, as they're often overlooked while the focus is placed on, for example, energy projects and other types of projects. Moving on to the next slide. Now, looking especially at the agricultural advisory services, like I earlier said, from experiences with the projects in Kenya and in other regions, we see these basically the provision of technical support when you're considering that such projects usually involve smallholder farmers. The provision of technical support is usually one of, if not the key driver of the project's long-term benefits. So for example, the agricultural improvements, which lead to the livelihood benefits that are often the major incentive for smallholders to participate in such projects. As an illustration, we have here from a study which was done by Thomas Wehinger under the Economics of Land Degradation Initiative by the GIZ. So Thomas was looking at the impacts of sustainable land management practices in terms of revenue, but also the carbon credit potential for smallholder farmers. And we see here from the table 1 that compared to farmers who were not, so the control group of farmers who were, let's call them non-sustainable land management farmers, comparing their income And this study was done in, just to mention, in 2023. So the farmers had been implementing these practices since 2018. And at the time the study was done, there was a noticeable difference in yearly revenue between the farmers who implemented these practices and those who didn't. Most of this revenue was coming from crop yields, also fruits, agroforestry related, also the other different types of farm, on-farm income, including, for example, compost, manure, and so on, that they were making a business out of and selling to neighbors, for example, which are as a direct result of the extension services that they received during the project. Interestingly as well, we found that the main share of such project types, of the cost of such project types, is also coming from the provision of these extension services. And from the figure, the second figure here, we can see that the extension services are taking over 70% of project cost of the Western Kenya Carbon Project. So that's something that is often missed in such conversations, as most people focus a lot on the monitoring aspect, but really the provision of these services we see as a key leverage point due to its high significance for providing benefits, but also for optimizing the cost of such projects. And a related point is the close linkage of the technical support also to the monitoring of the project. And what I mean by this is usually in practice, the delivery of extension services comes along with the need for frequent backstopping to ensure that practices are being adopted, that they're being implemented correctly, for example, which is more or less tying into the monitoring component of the project. And it's quite difficult to separate these key aspects. So that's also something we will touch on when we talk more about the MRV, overall MRV system of the project. As a summary of this slide, I would say that there's a lot of potential and also a lot of ongoing research, and more is needed definitely in terms of benchmarking the provision of extension services to project outcome. So for example, even cost benchmarking of extension services, there's not too much information available on this. And we believe that this is something that would greatly improve the economics of such project types as a very key part of the project in general. Looking at the measurements, reporting, and verification, the MRV. Next slide, please. What we see overall is a scarcity of methods that are suitable for smallholder projects to account for soil organic carbon change. So at the moment, the VM42 by VCS under Vera is currently the only method that is suitable for soil carbon project types for smallholders, but it's quite expensive due to the requirement for soil measurement. So this is because previously, most similar projects would apply the VM17 methodology, which was a pure modeling-based approach. That has now been inactivated, and the new methodology requires that soil measurements are also taken quite frequently, of course, adding costs to the project. We see in the near future newer methodologies possibly popping up. For example, the VCS recently has published a draft afforestation, reforestation methodology, which the final version may be released shortly. We also see the possibility for niche standards, for example, the gold standard, which has previously focused on dairy projects, rice cultivation projects, strengthening the soil organic carbon aspect as well. Or for example, Plan Vivo, which has previously focused on much smaller scale projects, may also gain traction over time. Overall, what we see lacking the most is an effort to integrate the beneficial aspects of different soil organic carbon monitoring approaches into one that is usable for smallholder family farms. What we mean by this is basically incorporating the benefits of, for example, remote sensing in terms of improving, reducing uncertainty with activity modeling, which is needed by farmers, especially for practice adoption monitoring and delivering the advisory services, for example. And yeah, basically a combination or an integration of these different approaches into one suitable methodology is something that would take a collaborative effort from project developers as well as standards, research, and so on. One important thing I want to highlight that I think is often lost sight, lost in the whole discussion is during the project implementation, non-carbon impacts are also often also need to be assessed. So for example, the impacts of the project on the livelihoods of farmers, but also on, for example, biodiversity, in general, ecosystem services. And ideally, these other benefits, co-benefits should be somewhat integrated into the overall project MRV system in a way that is not completely, adding additional costs and resource demands on the project. And that's where we really see the benefits of survey and field-based approaches like the one used in the Western Kenya Carbon Project to capture some of these other impacts without too much additional effort. And speaking of the monitoring approach used in the Western Kenya Carbon Project, next slide, please. So the project basically uses a sample-based modeling approach. So what this means, so the activity-based modeling is activity data is collected from farms via surveys and then used as inputs to models that are then essentially used to predict the changes in soil organic carbon stocks. This data is collected through surveys, and in this particular project, the surveys are collected on a sample basis by stratifying the farms according to key parameters like climate, soil properties, as well as land use practices, which were found to have the highest impact on soil carbon dynamics. Just to show a benchmark of the results of this approach, we look again at the study by Thomas Wainga, who collected some soil samples during his study, although a limited number of soil samples, just to point that out. But from his results, he basically measured the difference in stocks between the control group and the farmers who had adopted sustainable land management practices and tried to determine from that the yearly soil organic carbon removal rate, which he found quite a broad range depending on the types of practices that each farmer implemented, basically because this is also quite unique from farm to farm. But what was interesting is that compared to the removal rates that are derived using the modeling approach under the VCS modeling methodology, the Western Kenya Carbon Project actually appears quite conservative, or rather yields quite conservative credit estimates compared to this. And here we see a lot of potential for accuracy improvements through, some of the newer methodologies or direct measurements in a way, of course, that is cost effective and so on to basically improve the benefits that farmers are able to gain from such projects through unlocking potential additional carbon credits. So we see that even though the modeling approaches are quite conservative compared, to if direct measurements were to be taken, but there's a lot of potential there for, higher benefits in general for the project, for farmers. due to methodology development. To wrap up, some key conclusion points. Next slide, please. Yeah, and so to conclude, one of the major things that we see that is still limiting the scale of agricultural carbon projects is basically a shortage of capacity for project development, which is why we see huge value in platforms like this one through the 4 per 1,000 initiative to sort of share and learn from such experiences among stakeholders. I want to also emphasize the provision of this technical support to farmers in such projects as a very central point, basically to the continuation of such practices being that are being introduced to ensure that they're continued over time to provide benefits for the farmers, but also due to its high impact on the project cost as well as a key point to look into in terms of improving on the project's entire business model. Again, like I just said, we see a lot of potential for improving accuracy of current methods in terms of increasing farmer benefits. So potential benefits that farmers could derive from this project. But again, to point out that an approach which integrates this with, for example, activity monitoring that is still necessary as well to make sure that these benefits are actually derived and that these practices are implemented and so on. And also, in a cost-effective way is still lacking. So we see that also as a very key point as well. And overall, final points would be that alignment of the whole project design with farmer interest is key as a project developer to ensure that, for example, the practices being promoted, for example, are not only beneficial for the farmer, but that the farmer can continue those practices, that the whole MRV system is collecting data that can actually provide useful feedback to the farmer as well. So we see that overall alignment of the project design with farmer interest is really key for such projects to be sustainable and to be successful in the long run. And on that note, I would like to end here. Thank you very much for your attention, and I look forward to an interesting discussion afterwards. Thank you. Over to you, Claudia.
Thank you so much, Ada, for this really interesting presentation. I think you really pointed out some very important aspects here, and I think this one point on the extension services is also some experience you gained during this Western Kenya project, and I guess we will hear more about it later on as well. And also for mentioning the knowledge gaps which are still there regarding MRV systems, which are really fit for purpose regarding smallholders. And I'm very happy you brought it up here, and also that you mentioned that like more exchange is needed there. And maybe let's see during the Q&A session we can dive into that again, or if not there, then later on the wiki. So let's use this opportunity to see what other experiences are out there and like how others approach that issue as well. Thank you again, Ada, for this insight. I could see that Tim was raising his hand. Tim, do you have any additions to Ada's presentation? Do you want to come in right now? Or would you like to come in during the Q&A session?
I would come in later to answer some of the questions in the chat.
Okay, perfect then. Okay, thanks a lot. So let us continue and move on to the next presentation, which of course is closely related to the one we just heard. I would like to give the floor to Aaron Munzer from the Soil Carbon Certification Services, who will zoom in again further and introduce us to the Western Kenya carbon projects and the approaches they followed there in project design and the experiences they could gather during this project development. Thank you very much. And Aaron, the floor is yours.
Thank you, Claudia. Thank you, Alexis, and everybody for your time and opportunity to share our experience as the the developers of the Western Kenya Soil Carbon Project. So I will just share two parts about our experience, and one is just a general introduction about soil carbon certification services as the implementing entity on the ground, and then just about the project itself, and just share some of the lessons that we've learned along the way. It might not be as neat in terms of our experience because it's all things on the ground usually are very fluid and move very fast. But yeah, we are happy to share our lessons so far. So just to start off, so Soil Carbon Certification Services is the entity that was set up by GIZ to implement this soil carbon project in Western Kenya. It was set up as, could we say, successor of the ongoing ProSoil projects in Western Kenya. Some of the general project features, it was basically set up to leverage carbon finance to provide agricultural extension services to smallholder farmers in Western Kenya. That is in line with the GIZ ProSoil program, which was started much earlier in 2015. The idea or the vision is to finance these extension services through carbon credits generated by participating farmers who adopt the sustainable agricultural land management practices. And we are not for profits, and we basically intend to plow back all the revenues raised through this project into operating the project. The initial crediting period that was envisioned for this project is 20 years, of course, with some retrospective claims from as early as 2019, and of course now projected to run up to 2039, and with a vision, of course, to extend during that period. We are targeting about 100,000 smallholder farmers, and the idea is to bring them on board to adopt sustainable agricultural land management practices. We envision to cover about 32,000 hectares, which will be brought under SLM by the crediting period target of 20 years, that is by 2039. And these will be, of course, the efforts for these will be financed through the carbon credits. We expect about 1.9 million tons of carbon sequestration over that period. Of course, before we started much earlier, before the VM42 came into place. So we are under the VM017, but we plan to transition to VM42 in the near future. So I've just talked generally about the experience in terms of our vision and how we intend to set up that, and how we intend to, or how we've been, setting up that and operating. Of course, this being a GIZ initiative, although now we are independent. GIZ was financing the initial phase of this, and we are grateful for that, because one of the lessons that we've learned is for this kind of initiatives, there is a huge need for both public and private finance. And especially for the need for public finance is the need to de-risk the whole project development phase. As you can see, there are quite a number of challenges, and it is very upfront capital heavy, and so the outlays need a lot of financing options and innovation, so to speak. So I will speak briefly about some of the challenges that we were trying to address. And one of those challenges, and I think they have been captured very well by Okoli from Unique. Some of those challenges include degraded soil, because in our areas of operation, we operate in the 3 counties in Western Kenya, Bungoma, Kakamega, and Siaya, where farmers, smallholder farmers, basically mostly practice subsistence farming, which is characterized by low inputs, low yields, and continuous loss of soil fertility. Another challenge that we are trying to address by this project is inadequate extension services, because of quasi absence of agricultural extension services among smallholder farmers in the region. And then also low yields, as mentioned previously, and ultimately the impact of climate change. The approach for soil protection is because we understand and we appreciate that soil is a very important resource in all this climate change and climate impact debate. I think it is usually seen as just as a background issue, but it's actually at the center of the very livelihoods of smallholder farmers who are disproportionately impacted by climate change issues. In terms of, so I will transition quickly to some of our lessons that we have learned in the short period that we have been in existence since this. Of course, we were registered in 2022. We started in 2022, but prior to that, there was a lot of background work that was done by GIZ and the technical advisor, the unique land use. So some of the things that we've learned is that we are operating in a very fluid environment that is quickly changing. For instance, I've just mentioned one of them is the evolving standards, as mentioned earlier. Currently, VM42 is the only standard that deals with smallholder farmers and that kind of a and so there is transition. Of course, its predecessor VM17 was attempting to do this, and now it's being upgraded. And so this, of course, as a project developer, brings a lot of challenges in terms of transitions, and of course, trying to find buyers who, and they will ask, hey, you are registered and you are verified under VM17. What happens with VM42? And of course, having to explain the whole transition plans and how we are planning to transition to that. Another fluidity factor in this operating environment is the climate change bill, or the regulatory environment. Specifically in our context here in Kenya, is that the climate change bill that or now act that was signed into law that requires 40% revenue sharing with communities, especially for nature-based project development. There is a lot of course, having been signed recently, and of course, which was done very quickly. There is a lot of learnings and interpretation issues about the law and how to apply it effectively and how to, of course, safeguard the project. We are confident ourselves. We don't have a problem because we are not for profit, and all our revenues, of course, are directed towards running the project and giving back to the community. There is also the ongoing issues with the carbon markets, accountability and integrity issues, effectiveness questions for some of these projects. What we see for ourselves is it's important to keep engaging in transparent and honest discussions as project developers, and important to differentiate the problematic issues versus just the whole negative PR issues, and to ensure, because carbon markets are playing an important role, they ensure that the resources should get to the people who need them the most, especially in the front line of climate change fight. And then one other lesson that we have learned under the context of a fluid operating environment is the coordination challenge. We operate in an environment where there's a lot of interest, a lot of multiple developers who are taking keen interest coming in, and most of them probably not very well prepared. Others have different approaches, and that becomes extremely difficult because the government is also playing catch up. There is no proper coordination framework, and that has had a lot of impact in our operation, because we are trying to both develop a project and coordinate all these farmers that we have and our care, and try to ensure that they get the best of these projects. And so that coordination challenge is one of the lessons that we continue to learn and deal with. And then you realize that we are dealing with smallholder farmers, and the smallholder farmers, it's a transaction heavy organization. Mobilizing, as you can see, our target is 100,000 farmers. So far, we have registered slightly over 32,000 farmers in our first phase, which we hope to be the number to sustain in the coming 2 phases to reach our 100,000 target in about 6 years. So there's issues of it's very transaction heavy, sensitization to ensure free, prior, informed consent in project participation. There is issues of registration, contracting, and mapping the funds, and essentially after all that setup work, then there is the actual service delivery, because our model is based on delivering extension services, and that means that our work essentially after the initial setup is going to double, because we have to engage with farmers. We have to ensure that because our model is we engage implementing partners through performance-based contracts to offer these services, and coordinating all that while we are also doing the actual technical work of monitoring, reporting, and verification of the project. That is a lot of work. Yet we also want to remain very lean to ensure that we do not incur a lot of administrative costs, and to ensure that all the revenues that we get, the biggest chunk goes back to serving the farmers. And then lastly is the steep learning curve for stakeholders. As I've mentioned, all the stakeholders involved, from farmers, from us as project developers, from our funders and supporters, to the government, everybody has learned that there is a huge challenge and there is a huge need for coordination. And the carbon markets and all these are quite new for all the stakeholders here. It's a very nascent sort of subsector, and everybody is trying to catch up. The regulatory environment is trying to catch up. Innovation is trying to catch up. So there is a lot of there's a steep learning curve for everyone is involved, and a need for continuous learning and willingness to change and adapt and tweak here and there. So let me stop there. Yeah, happy to address any questions, and thank you so much for your time.
Thank you very much, Aaron, for these insights. Very interesting and very complex. You mentioned the fluidity of the environment you're dealing with, the big group of very diverse people in when it comes to the smallholder farmers and how to organize them. I think there's a lot of experience you could gain there, and thank you very much for sharing some of it. I guess you could share a lot more if there was more time. Thanks a lot. So maybe now we still have half an hour, which is quite a good amount of time to move into the discussion phase now. I saw that some of you have already put some questions in the chat. You can of course continue to do so, but you also have the chance to just raise your hand and ask a question directly. We would just ask you to turn on your camera when speaking, so that people can see you, and to briefly introduce you when you raise your question. Okay, I can see maybe before I come back to the questions in the chat, I saw that Juliane Wiesenhütter raised her hand. Juliane, would you like to kick us off in the Q&A session?
Yes, Claudia, thank you very much. I can do so. Sometimes the icebreaker is necessary. My name is Julian. I'm responsible for the GIZ part in this movement with SCCS, Unique, and also 4 Mil. And first of all, I would like to thank you for this collaboration we have started 3 years ago to set the scene and give a concrete example how carbon credits schemes are possible. First of all, and also for 4 Mil for the exchange we had during the years with a larger, broader community with the soil climate community of practice. So I would like to zoom a little bit out. We have this case in Kenya, which is, of course, context specific. And the idea why we have supported this on behalf of BMZ is that the sustainable land management sector, let's say, is underfinanced. There's a lot of development finance and public finance, but very little. This is not enough to remunerate farmers in their work. So first of all, they do that work for food security, to feed their families, but also there's a lot of activities which keep the ecosystem alive and to deliver also goods and services for the population and for the worldwide. So that's why they need a kind of remuneration. And this is the case. And actually, at the beginning, I was also surprised that the farmers were interested not in cash flow and transfer, that they were interested that the investment will be will finance this these ongoing services, the advisory services. They said that they can keep up some activities, sustainable land management activities. So I would like to zoom out and would like to know from Aaron if you think that this will, if you upscale the SCCS activities, will that be the case only in Western Kenya, or do you think that will be the case also in other parts of your country? And also maybe from Unique, we had also some context sneak in other countries. Were that differently in other countries? What do you think? Is there, does it need in other countries other systems with cash transfer or other forms of remunerating the farmers? Thank you.
Claudia, I don't know how you want us.
Oh,
Do you want
sorry.
me to take up the question, or do you want to gather a few more, or what's the approach?
I think, Aaron, I'm happy for you to just take up that question, and then later on I will try to summarize a little the questions from the chat and see what other questions might have arisen. So please go ahead to answer. Yes, please.
Yeah, thanks, Julian. About that question on scaling and our experience about cash-based payment versus service-based payments to farmers. I think initially, at face value, farmers are of course excited by the notion of cash-based payment, but their experience, especially in that region, has been that cash-based models do not work because, of course, the smallholder farmers are very small units of land, and the carbon sequestration from that the units of land that they have uh, usually generate very small amounts of revenue, and as a result, by the time you factor in cost of implementation and eventual net payment to the farmer, the payments do not make sense. So the only approach that really delivers value for farmers is aggregation of all these pieces of land and generate revenues and aggregate service delivery, and that makes sense from both cost effectiveness and also the actual impact that the farmers see. So if we scale, and which is our intention, hopefully, is that the farmers, there's always a learning curve that while the cash-based models seem very attractive, essentially are not sustainable, and they end up collapsing and that becomes that is also mixed up with the experience of farmers from other models where they have gotten services for a while, they phase in, they phase out, and the issue of quasi extension services, and farmers get frustrated. And also they feel exploited because people come with cash-based models. They literally cannot sustain it, and they have to exit, and it leaves a lot of questions for farmers. So it's both it's an experience-based learning process where farmers who see the contrast between the two models opt for the service delivery model, but it requires a lot of course, learning, a lot of exchanges, a lot of transparency and openness. Yeah, so that's probably my view at this point in time.
Thank you, Aaron. I see, Tim, would you like to come in on that one as well directly, or is it related to another point?
Yes, I would like to respond to the question from Juliane. What kind of models do we see? We mainly in these kind of projects where extension is key and extension is costly. So it costs about, let's say, in the range of $12 to $15 per hectare a year. There, we only see a well-functioning model where farmers get extension services in response to transferring the carbon rights, because there's no room for cash payments. That's at the moment also roughly the carbon market price. So at the moment, and that's also the reason why you only see this project upcoming in the last couple of years, because the carbon price is high enough to sustain these projects. Now going a little bit back, because I saw a number of questions that I would like to tackle. There was a question related to this new EU decision on carbon neutral claims. So basically, there was in the press a lot of discussion on greenwashing. And as a response, there was this EU decision. But interestingly, in the greenwashing debate, there's a new research that came out from Trove that basically indicated that companies that buy carbon credits are twice as ambitious to reduce their emissions in their production chains as companies that do not buy carbon credits. So at the moment, the problem is a little bit that those that shy away from the climate crisis, those companies are better treated than those that go and invest in action. And investing in action means to invest in these kinds of projects. So basically the question from Gabriel from GIZ, what is the implications on the carbon credits with the new regulation? I think this is not yet clear whether buyers of carbon credits see a big difference between whether they can sell it as a claim or carbon credit. At the moment, there's only big confusion generated by the regulator. And this is also a case in time what Aaron mentioned, where a regulation was put through. And maybe this brings me to the next question to answer. Benjamin asked, what is a good revenue share between landowner and project developer? I would argue there is not the magic formula, because it depends on the project. And if you see it now in the relation of the SCCS project, basically the farmer gets all the benefits that comes from the carbon trading in terms of extension. And the setup of the SCCS as a non-for-profit ensures that this is the best deal for the farmer. So this 80-20 has no relevance here or any other kind of share. So these kind of things that put into carbon regulations like in Kenya are very difficult to implement, because they depend on the project setup and the project types, and are based on our experience these agricultural soil carbon projects. And finally, I would like to say a response to Viri. She asked how the modeling work, so the approach applied in the Kenya case study. So basically what is done, you're monitoring the activities on a sample basis, what farmers are doing, mulching, composting, agroforestry, and then you're using a model. In this case, it's a Ross-C model. What basically predicts, if you know how much biomass is produced and what happens with it, how much ends up as soil carbon. And what the study showed that was done in this project with Direct, that's at the moment the crucial issue. Modeling is always as good as the input data. Direct measurements is always as good as it reflects the reality on the ground. And the huge range of the data presented in the study shows you how difficult direct measurements are in smallholder farming system, because they're so heterogeneous. So therefore, the proposal is really to use direct measurements to improve the model understanding, but to use activity monitoring, because that's aligned with farmers' interest. They want to know what is my yield response, and that's what they also measure. But unfortunately, the only methodology in the market that was going this route was inactivated, mainly because there was a consolidation with less methodologies in the market. But therefore, at the moment, we have to conclude there's not a really good methodology for smallholder agriculture. The only remaining one, the 42 from Vera VCS, needs to be seen how this is implemented in practice. There's hardly any experience because this methodology was developed for large-scale precision farming in the US. Thank you for... And back to Claudia.
Yeah. Thank you very much, Tim, for clarifying on those questions. You already picked up quite a number of questions from the chat. So I hope the people who asked those questions got a sufficient answer. Thank you, Tim. Maybe just to continue with the questions in the chat before we come to you, Fred. And I think let's see how technical we can get here, but there was one question also related to the sampling. You were talking about the importance of on the ground action or sampling compared to modeling as well. And one question in the chat was like what kind of soil sampling methodology you would suggest? Like, would you rather go for single cores or like for bulked samples? And if you go for the bulked approach, which kind of area would you recommend? And I guess that's, well, will depend probably on the context, but I'd still like to open that questions to the people engaged in the project development, not to forget it, as I guess it's also interesting. Anybody would like to comment on that? Tim, Aaron, Ada, I don't know. Just I see Tim, you raise your hand. Maybe you can just jump in briefly. Tim, would you like to take that question?
Yes, so sorry. So first of all, in the project, we applied the VM17, which is activity monitoring and modeling, no direct measurements. The VM42 requires direct measurements, and I refer to the VM42. It just has 100-page of explanations how to do the direct measurements. It's a nice document for a highly specialized person to read it. So just not to confuse it, the study from Weninger was just a kind of, it has two purposes. One is to understand what's the cash benefit or the livelihood benefit from farmers, and the other is to get an idea on the issues related to direct measurements. But the issues came out, you have a huge heterogeneity and you're measuring a small change against the large stock. So therefore, this was certainly not the approach you would need for a robust carbon project. If you're interested in this, you would just need to read the VM42 description.
Okay, thank you, Tim. And you're right, of course, that's it's not an easy to answer question like in a short amount of time. And I guess, like for the people interested, I mean, there are many approaches going on, like where they try to combine modeling with on-the-ground measurements. Also under the frame of the CIRCASA project or no AUCASA project, I think there are many different approaches out there. So if you would like to get further reading material on those ones, you could also contact us, and we can try to link you up to the authors. Okay, then next I would like to invite Fred Marani to ask his or her question. Please come forward.
Okay, thank you. I'll just add a few points. I also work for soil carbon certification services with Aaron. So I'll just add 1 or 2 points to the issue of cash payment to farmers against the provision of extension services. Yeah, the decision to design this project in such a way was arrived at also based on the lessons learned in other projects being implemented in the region and in the country. So it was learned that cash payment in many projects was not very sustainable. In fact, it affected the cohesion of farmer groups and communities. And you have also realized that access to extension services is limiting, and farmers appreciate this fact that access to extension services is not easy. But there are also positives that have been noted from those farmers who have been able to access extension services. So basically, based on the lessons learned, this project was also designed to take the best from the experiences that has happened within the region. And I can say that 2,000 farmers who have enrolled into the project appreciate the role of extension. So out of sensitization, they accepted that extension is the best course for them to address the challenges they face in terms of land degradation and food insecurity. So I just wanted to add that is basically based on the lessons learned by other projects in the region, that extension services is appreciated, and it's a way to go, and farmers accept it voluntarily. Yeah.
Thank you, Fred, for that addition. I guess that was kind of crucial to know, like how you got there to take up on that approach. Thanks for that. Maybe I see Kerstin or David Kersting. Sorry. Would you like to raise your question?
Yeah, thank you, Claudia, and greetings from Western Kenya. My name is David Casting, and I am the project manager of the ProSoil project that has been mentioned here several times, and that provided the initial trainings to the farmers that are now benefiting or participating from the SCCS-led carbon project. Mine is rather a food for thought and looking at the bigger picture. When the observation here in Western Kenya is that we find a lot of different development projects working in the area of sustainable land management. And I think the importance of agricultural extension services cannot be overestimated. Yet we see very little public investment in it. And I think it's a commonly known dilemma of development cooperation, that as long as these projects are there, there's little reason for government institutions to invest into these kind of services. The same probably applies to carbon projects or carbon finance in general. And I would be interested to learn, since we also have other stakeholders in this call, are there good examples in which cases we manage to use carbon finance to leverage public finance, other than providing an excuse to public institutions not to invest in it because someone else is doing it?
Thank you, David. I guess you opened the floor a little for all the people on that call. So if anybody here, like from another stakeholder group, as you pointed out, would like to comment on that, please come forward. Otherwise, or while you're still thinking, I don't know if one of the speakers would like to pick that up, but I can see Eleanor. I take it you would like to answer to the question posed by David.
Yes, I don't really have an answer as such, but have some experience of working with a project only on the periphery in Ecuador, where it was rather than national scale markets that took this on. It was a regional scale project where the regional government actually got involved and provided carbon financing and payment for ecosystem services. So it seems like on a smaller subnational scale, it can work better. That's just an observation, really.
Thank you, Elena, for sharing that that experience. Is there anybody else interested to comment or share an experience on that point? Yes, please, Hector. Hector, I saw you just raised your hand. Would you like to comment on that? Or maybe I'm not taking your name rightly. I can see
sorry.
Hector
Do
Fabio
you hear
Santos.
me now?
Yes, we hear you.
Now,
thanks.
Right? Sorry, I was muted. It's a classic in this event. Yeah, thank you to all the speakers, and thank you for the invitation to this event. And yeah, basically also like to share some experiences from our project. I'm advisor at the Global Partnership on Drug Policies and Development, like working like in rural settings in areas characterized by the cultivation of illicit drug crops. And in that sense, yeah, in Colombia we have like some experiences related to combining like this payment for ecosystem services, not like associated like to soil organic carbon, but also but more like related to the implementation of sustainable agricultural practices, and also like to the conservation of the forest. And then yeah, at the first stage we also have like supported like the farmers, like with some like, let's say, some goods and technical assistance for the transition to like a let's say more sustainable way of production, but also like supporting them like let's say like characterizing the areas that will be like subject of this payment for ecosystem service / carbon credit. That is like it has been like regulated by Colombia since like I don't know, like 6 years ago. It's like the first like regulation that emerged for like payment for environmental services. And then yeah, we started like this, like supporting this couple of pilot projects. I also can like share like some of the experiences of the let's say the documents are in Spanish. But yeah, we started then, and then now it's like what the legislation says is that it can be like I mean the buyers of these services can be like from the public sector, from the international organizations, but also private ones. And so far, after the design of the payment for ecosystem services scheme, there were like some private small private sector in that region that were interested in paying for this like service. And in principle, it was like associated to water resources, to water supply, to guarantee like like provision of water in the region. Since also it was not easy like to establish how I mean they are as private companies in that regions were like they were not like offsetting like their emissions. They were more related to guaranteeing the water provision. That is like I also wanted to share. Thank you.
Thank you, Santos. And I guess that's also a very important point you're raising here, which also popped up a little in some here and there before about the co-benefits and the other environmental matters which can be addressed by those kinds of activities. And I guess that's a very important point to consider. And I think this was also mentioned by Sophia in the beginning, that the compensation initiative is trying to take into account that matter as well. Thank you for that. I can see we're already very close to the end of this session. I think we're quite good with answering the questions which came up in the chat. Maybe one question which was not addressed yet was about how to engage farmers' organizations, not only as gate openers, but really as project partners. And for me, this is also somehow related to what Ada was mentioning before, that we have to make sure that the projects really benefit the farmers. And also related what Fred mentioned, that in the Kenya case, the demand for extension services came from the farmers. So how can we make sure in project design that we're aware of farmers' needs before we design the project? So maybe Ada or one of the others can quickly pick up those questions in like a combined answer as well, just in 1 or 2 minutes. Ada, Aaron, I don't know who would like to take that question.
Adalgo, do you want to go?
Yeah, sure. I can speak a little bit about this, also from the project developer perspective as well. So, I mean, now with the new updates, for example, to the VCS standard, I'm seeing a lot of increased focus being placed on safeguards, but increasingly stakeholder engagement and things like FPIC and so on, which I think is a really great development in this aspect. So there's this focus on consultation with the stakeholders, the community, the farmers throughout the entire project design. Also having worked a lot with other standards, add-on standards like CCB, I think that they sort of provide a very good framework for dealing with this issue of consulting with farmers. So basically the main principle is that the project design should carry along the stakeholders, the community members, the farmers who are involved in it, in terms of identifying the goals of the project, the challenges basically that the farmers have, and what they sort of how they envision that the project should address these. And I think that this is very important to have this as sort of like an integral part of the project design itself, because it basically guides on the long-term sustainability of such projects in terms of them being aligned, like I said, with the interests of farmers. So yeah, just as a short answer, I think how to identify or like you said, make sure that the project is aligned with the interest of the farmers is by engaging in thorough stakeholder consultation as part of the project design. And I think that's one positive aspect that I see with new developments from the carbon standards in terms of increasing focus on this aspect. But also, Aaron, yeah, please feel free to add something here.
Yeah, maybe just briefly, I can add, thanks for that, Adalgo. I think in addition, I think there is a need to strike a balance. One is when, of course, designing these projects, these are public interest, sort of, all these projects are public interest projects. So you're having a huge chunk of public affected or participating or interested in these projects. And these projects are also addressing issues of global concern like climate change and its impact. And so there is a need to balance that with the markets and the finance bit of it, because, for instance, someone said these projects need to be driven by maybe farmer produce organizations and all that, and well, that's great because they are the ones that are disproportionately affected by climate change and its impact. However, there is also the issue of finance and the risks that are involved, and so there is a need to balance the markets, the finance, what the people who are financing these, also the people who are benefiting from this, and all sorts of stakeholders. So I think it's a very interesting balance, and I think the market needs to keep evolving to be able to take care of all these interests. But also in terms of designing projects, I think the basic principles of international development, where I saw someone saying you do not just parachute a solution. Hence the Adalgo's reference to participatory approach, where you don't just focus on the technical aspects of the project, focus on the human aspects of it, and how the communities are affected, and how they can benefit and how they can be supported to ensure that they're a key beneficiary and key participants. These are not just another means to an end, so to speak.
Thank you very much, Aaron and Ada, for clarifying on that one and stressing the importance of a broad engagement from all stakeholders from the very beginning. Okay, and by that, unfortunately, we have reached the end of this event. I guess there are a lot of more questions out there and issues to be raised and to discuss on, which we cannot touch on now anymore. But what we would like you to do, and I think that's one of the nice things about the wiki we have for all members of the community of practice and partly also for everybody else who's on that call, that I would like to invite you to keep on discussing and to keep on sharing what you are working on and what your views are on certain topics. You can either do so by just uploading your documents or your whatever you would like to share on your work directly on the wiki page for those of you who are a member of the community of practice and have the credentials. For those of you who are not a member of the community of practice, just send a message to Alexis, to Julia, or to Sophia containing the documents you would like us to share. Then we can upload it on the wiki page and it will be accessible to everybody online then. So warm invitation to keep on discussing on that important issue. Yes, so for me, in the very last minute, I think it just remains to thank all our speakers today for sharing their experiences, sharing what they did on the ground in Kenya at the global level, and also like the reflections they had about the lessons learned which came out of the projects which have been implemented in Kenya. And I can only encourage all of you to have a look at the guidebook. We shared the link in the chat, and we will also share it on the wiki page again. You know, saw the faces behind it. So if you have further questions on that, just come forward and address the people who are working either in the project or in the write-up of this very useful handbook. So let's keep on working together on that one. Thank you again for all of you who were here for this event today. And just as a very last remark, let me also invite you to the next event coming up, which will be in the SCC webinar series I just mentioned in the beginning. So it will have a rather scientific focus this time, and it will focus on soil inorganic carbon and take place on the 17th of October. There's also an event page for that, which Julia will just share and which you can also see, which you will find in the presentation, which we share online. So if you're interested in new scientific findings on soil inorganic carbon, please join us for that event. And as always, we will keep you updated on the next events to come, also in the next community of practice events. We would like to remind the community of practice members to maybe take part in the survey we just shared with you, to see together like what are the topics you're interested in, where would you like to have further events, what kind of exchange possibilities for exchange you would like us to strengthen. So take part in the survey. And as a very last point, and I think this is especially important for the audience here today working on carbon certification and carbon standards or carbon projects in general. Under the strategic plan of the Cut per Mill initiative, we have one aim focusing at the design of carbon markets, where we have a task force working at the moment on co-benefits of carbon projects and or environmental co-benefits and their inclusion in carbon standards and carbon schemes. So if you're working on that matter, please join our task force. Let's see how we can get you engaged in the discussions, in the work we're doing there. You can also find the link for that on this last slide. Okay, and now we overran 5 minutes, but I guess that's still kind of okay. Thank you very much again, everybody, for joining, and Alexis for preparing that event. All our colleagues from GIZ for this really nice collaboration we've had during the last years, and especially, of course, our speakers. Have a nice day, and let's make sure to keep in touch via the wiki or via email. Thanks a lot.
Thank you for the moderation, Claudia. Goodbye.
Bye-bye.
Thank you.
Thank you very much and bye.